All of our productions at GCTV are brought to you in part by The Arbors at Greenfield, assisted living community providing a unique balance of independence and personal care that offers residents and families the most precious gift of all, peace of mind. Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it, close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com, call them at 773-0838, and check them out on Facebook. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all the productions at Greenfield Community Television.
I'm going to ask our panelists to come up for the first plenary session, updating the K through 12 funding formula. And that's sort of a catch-all title because, as our guests know and as everybody in the room knows who's been here before, we have a title, but after the presentations, it's fair game. If you have other things in mind on the subject matter at hand, you're welcome to raise those questions and issues as well. So the panel starts off with my colleague and friend, Senator Sonia Chang-Diaz from Boston, who serves as the Senate Chair of the Education Committee, and I want to ask you to give her a warm welcome to our stage here so that she can participate in our panel. Sonia's done an amazing job navigating many complex education issues in the Senate, and I'm really delighted you were willing to come out this morning and spend some time with us. She had quite a week. She was one of the gang of four who crafted a piece of legislation which seeks to really expand our vision and debate on public education these days, because as most of us know, most of what we've been seeing and hearing out of Boston has to do with charter schools over the last 20 years. And with her leadership and her colleagues on the Gang of Four, they really prepared what I would call education reform 2.0 by changing the discussion and the dialogue from just charter schools to which serve 4% of the kids now, and if the ballot question goes forward and were to pass, 8%. And she said, no, we have to talk about 100% of the children in public education in Massachusetts. So thank you, Sonia, for your leadership in changing and pushing the dialogue back into making sure that every child has excellent educational opportunity. And next we bring forward no stranger to this crowd, although we took a couple of years off from education panels. He came every time we had an education panel prior to that, and here he is back by popular demand, Commissioner Mitchell Chester. The popular demand, by the way, was his staff's popular demand. And at least a few of you got to know him very well over the years as you debated with him on various education issues. And so we're glad to welcome you back and introduce you to some new people, as well as allow you to become reacquainted with some of your friends from Franklin and Hampshire counties. And has Dr. Mary Bourque arrived? She will be here in 5 minutes, so we'll introduce her when she arrives. So, shall we begin with the senator, and then we'll go to Commissioner Chester, and then hopefully the superintendent of the Chelsea schools will be here by then, and I'll introduce her at that time. Sonia?
Good morning, everyone. I was glad that the college president got a little call and response going, because that's how we do it in Roxbury as well, where I come from. So I'm going to start by just, adhering to the title, but as the Senate President said, open season if there are other things that you guys want to talk about. But both because it's the title of the session, but also because I think that the Foundation Budget Review Commission recommendations that we, and I say we, in a very large sense, because so many people participated in crafting those recommendations from all around the state that we came out with last fall, I truly believe are collectively the biggest lever that we have seen for closing the achievement gap in Massachusetts in at least probably the past decade. So I think it merits the title and the time on the docket today. So actually, let me just, for a jumping off point, I'm curious how many people in the room are familiar in any way with what I'm talking about when I say the FBRC. All right, good, all right. So as those of you who raised your hands know, and hopefully those of you who didn't will, maybe this will ring a bell. Over the past year, well, I guess now it's coming up on 2 years, there was this commission that was created by the legislature, brought into being through budget language a couple years ago, that designated a commission that was made up of stakeholders from across the education spectrum. So this was democratically appointed legislators, Republican appointees, teachers, superintendents, school committee members, regional school representatives, school business officials, economists, business leaders, you name it. And that group was probably either on the commission or on the advisory group for the commission. And we met over the course of a year, culminating in a final report that was issued this past, I think it was either November 1st or October 31st. I don't remember which date we finally issued it on. And to get to that culmination point, we held, I want to say it was 6 hearings, I think, across the state. We made a real concerted effort to hold those hearings at nights and on the weekends so that they would be accessible to people who have, to quote unquote real people, right? As opposed to legislators who, work for a living and have other jobs during the day, so that we could get the broadest spectrum of input. And the question before the commission was a pretty narrow one, and I say narrow in a positive way because there's so many questions before us, but we really wanted to go deep on this. The legislature wanted us to go deep on this one question, which is the foundation budget, right? This is, as the name would suggest, the formula that undergirds everything else in Chapter 70. And everything else in how we calculate state aid for K through 12 education. This is the calculation that we do first in order to calculate what does it cost to educate a student in Massachusetts. Before we get into wrangling over what share of that number should different groups pay, just what does it cost to begin with? What's the total pie look like? And 23, 24 years into education reform, since the Ed Reform Act of 1993, how accurate is that formula? And how effective is that formula at getting kids to the success line that we want to? And what the commission found over the course of all of those hearings and then our internal deliberations was that formula has essentially lost horsepower to the tune of at least $1 billion a year over the course of the last couple decades. And I suspect that finding, while it's a big number, actually does not come as a surprise to people in this room, because you're living it every day and every year as you're trying to hold those school district budgets together with 2 hands and some duct tape and some paper clips. And you have seen, and you spoke to us very powerfully over the course of those hearings about the death by 1,000 paper cuts that districts across the state have been suffering over the past, especially 10 years, because the foundation budget calculations and predictions have not been keeping pace with inflation, particularly in healthcare, but not only in healthcare. So the recommendations that we made focused on a few different areas, in particular, the rising cost of employee benefits, particularly driven by healthcare. And of course, that's not unique to school district budgets or municipal budgets. That's a problem, and it's not unique to government, right? That's a problem that everyone in America has equally been experiencing for the last couple decades. The rising cost of healthcare that's outpacing damn near everything else. I don't know, we're online, so I don't know if I'm allowed to swear a little bit. So that was one, and what we recommended is that we adjust the formula to make the inflation factor a specific one that's attached to healthcare, a specific one that's guided by the average inflation in the average plan for under the GIC, the state's health insurance buyer. So that was healthcare, and then we also suggested some changes to the way that we calculate and anticipate special education costs, both for in-district and out-of-district. We made some recommendations about how to adjust the increment that is attached to English language learner students. We heard a lot about this at the hearings and when we looked at national guidance, we found that Massachusetts is way below national best practices, particularly in the high school years, for what we project it's going to cost to adequately educate English language learners. And this is getting a little technical, but in particular is relevant for vocational education, that we changed the English language learner chunk of the formula to an increment instead of an allotment, and that means that it can also be attached to vocational schools, because previously you could only be counted as a vocational student or an English language learner, but of course many are both. So we changed it so that you could sort of layer those factors on top of each other. And then lastly, we made a recommendation about low-income students. And of course, you all know that a lot is wrapped up, right, in that designation. We heard a lot from local practitioners about the spike in a way that people described that really surprised local practitioners, that even they said that they could not have anticipated 10 or 20 years ago, the really surprising increase in the need for social emotional wraparound services in schools, that children are just coming into school with tremendous emotional needs and needs for support services for them and their families. And that's not the only issue disproportionately affecting low-income students, but one of the big drivers. And so we really drilled down there and said, and that's a place where we haven't gotten to success in the last 24-ish years, right? Education reform in '93 has brought us tremendous successes as a state, which I'm sure that the commissioner will talk some about, things that we should be really proud of. And a lot of the reforms to the foundation budget were about preserving, right, those gains and making sure that they don't further erode with time. But one place that we really haven't achieved success yet, as it was envisioned under education reform, was meeting that goal of all means all, right? In 1993, we made this really radically sensible promise that we were going to do quality education for every child in the Commonwealth, and we haven't reached that yet. We have great achievement, but we have deep pockets of inequity. So on the Foundation Budget Review Commission, we wanted to really drill deep on what do we need to do to get to success in the one place where we have failed thus far. Since ed reform, and that was in closing the achievement gap, in particular for our low-income students. So we suggested that we really need to up that increment of dollars that we attach to low-income students in the formula, and also recognize that districts that have high concentrations of poverty have even greater challenges facing them. If you have a few poor students in a district, that getting them to success is going to be, not easy, but relatively easier than getting students to success in a district that has very high concentrations of poverty. So that's the quick speed tour through the Foundation Budget Review Commission findings. And as some of you hopefully know, the Grand Compromise Bill, the RISE Act, that we just debated and passed on Thursday in the state Senate. One of the things that I am probably the thing that I'm most proud of and most invested in is that bill included a concrete path forward for implementation of the foundation budget recommendations, which those of us on the commission weren't sure if that report was just going to get put on a shelf and gather dust, or if the legislature was really going to take immediate action to bring it into reality. So I'm really pleased that we have a legislative vehicle that is moving now, that has those recommendations with a specific schedule for implementation. So I don't know how much time I was allotted. I probably went over it, but I will pass the proverbial mic now to my colleague on the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to hopefully be able to show you some slides, so I'm going to speak from here, but appreciation to President Rosenberg for inviting me, and as he has over the years. I will say, just to give you my own perspective on how important Senator Rosenberg's leadership is in the Commonwealth. When you spend most of your time in Boston, the conversation about Massachusetts policy is very Boston-centric. And your president, your senator, just does a phenomenal job, whether it's one-on-one with me or whether it's in the general court, of making sure that we don't lose track of the state as a whole. It's not all Boston and Boston, so I appreciate that leadership. I'm going to praise I'm going to offer a few words about my two panelists, one of whom is here. I understand Mary Bourque's on her way. Mary Bourque is the superintendent of the Chelsea School District, and just a courageous leader. I expect this will come out when you hear from her. Chelsea serves some of the most impacted population in the Commonwealth, has a very high number of new immigrant students, most of whom come without English language skills. And she has just been a courageous voice about the need to serve those kids well and not discard those kids. And I've just been very impressed with that. Senator Chang-Diaz co-chairs the Education Committee, so I get to sit down with her at least once a month. We have a regular meeting, and her leadership is second to none as well, and she gave you some perspective on the bill that was passed on the Senate side this week, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. So I'm going to talk a little bit about funding and spending in the Commonwealth on education, on K-12 education. And I'm going to start by saying that we have a tremendous amount to be proud of in the Commonwealth. Our achievement in elementary and secondary schools is second to none among the 50 states, and in fact is competitive in some of the international assessments that we've participated in, including the PISA, Program International Student Assessment, which most of the industrialized world participates in. It's an assessment of 15-year-olds, and our students have just performed quite well in that assessment. And we have made gains with all of our students, not just our top performing students. I mean, I'll argue that it's not enough. We still have tremendous gaps, whether you look on the basis of race, ethnicity, on the basis of income. But Senator Chang-Diaz mentioned the low income. And if you go, I should have brought this slide with me. I don't have it. But if you go back to the late 1990s, when we first started the MCAS program, and you looked at the 10th grade scores in reading and in math, for low-income students, the average score, the typical score, would be in the failing range, if I showed you that graph. And what's happened over time is that score has just risen steadily to the point today where the average score for a low-income student in the Commonwealth is now in the proficient range. And that's a tremendous progress, not trivial progress. The challenge here is twofold. First of all, despite that gain, low-income students lag behind non-low-income students in terms of their achievement. And perhaps most importantly is that 10th grade assessment is not a great indicator, not a sufficient indicator of whether or not a young person is in fact ready in terms of his or her academic preparation, right? The reading skills, literacy skills, and math skills for what colleges and employers expect of a high school graduate. And so we're in the process in the Commonwealth of making sure that the program of instruction as students move up the grades and certainly through high school is preparing students well for the expectations of the world they're going to enter so that they have options and they're ready for success. Today we're talking about the foundation budget, and the Senator gave you a great overview of what was discussed and what came out in the commission report and what's been codified in part, at least, in the bill that the Senate passed earlier this week. I'm someone who's interested not only in are we spending enough, but I'm also very interested in what are we doing with the dollars that we have, and what do we know about smarter ways to save our money and less smart to spend our money and less smart ways to spend our money. I think that this has to be a twofold conversation. It not only has to be a conversation about how much is enough and who contributes what comes from the local level, what comes from the state level, but it also has to be a conversation about what do we know about spending patterns, and what do we know about places that get better results with the dollars they have versus places that get less strong results with the dollars they have. So I'm going to show you a few charts, a few graphs that are going to they're very provocative to me, so I hope that they provoke your thinking, and I welcome discussion afterward about these. We spend in total in the K-12 sector about $16 billion a year. When you look at all the various sources of revenue, which are local, state, and federal dollars. It's about a $16 billion a year expenditure for just under 1 million students. So that's public education. So that's just over $16,000 per student is the average when you average across the state. That varies considerably. And so I'm going to show you if this works. I'm not sure how crisply this appears here. Hopefully you can see it. But this is a two-dimensional graph. On the horizontal axis is expenditure. So the further over to the right you go, the more is being spent. And this is on a per-pupil basis. And you can see this graph is set up from $5,000 to $30,000 per student. And then on the vertical axis, for the first set of graphs, this is a measure of achievement in English language arts and literacy. And the higher on that chart you go, the stronger the achievement. This is based on the MCAS results, percent of students who are proficient or above across all the grades in which students take the MCAS test. So each diamond is a school district. And you can see that there's a pretty wide variation in what we spend from one district to another. At the lowest extreme, farthest to the left, we have districts that are spending around $10,000 per student. And at the far right extreme, we have districts that are $25,000, even more than $25,000 per student in terms of what they are spending. So the interesting question here is there a strong relationship between how much a district spends and the results that the district gets? And I'm going to walk you through a few different displays here that I find very provocative. I don't know if you can see that red square. It's probably the contrast isn't very good in this room, but in the middle of the cluster of dots is a red square. That's the median for both achievement and spending. So the median, we're up around $15,000, a little more than $15,000 per student, and in terms of achievement, up around 70% proficiency. That, again, in this case, we're looking at English language arts. So the first question is, are the highest spending districts the ones that are getting the strongest results? And interestingly, I cut this one at 80% of students proficient or above. There's quite a range of what districts that are accomplishing that are spending, from districts that are spending under $15,000 per student to districts that are spending around $25,000 per student. Hopefully you sort of getting the graph and how to think about it. So then the question, is, do all the high spending districts get strong results? So kind of cut this around $20,000 and above. And there's a pretty substantial range from one that gets less than 60% proficient to districts that are up close to 100% of their students proficient. And then what do we know about the lowest performing on this measured district? So I cut this at 50% and below. And again, they're kind of clustered around the $15,000 mark, some less, some more. No clear nexus, no clear relationship between more dollars spent means higher achievement, less dollars spent means less achievement. I mean, you could take any point on the graph, take 15,000 and draw a vertical line in your mind up the graph, and we have districts that are getting anywhere from 40% proficient up to almost 100% proficient, spending roughly the same amount of money. Now, my interest in this is, what do we know? What are we finding out about districts that are getting better results than others who are spending similar amounts? That, to me, is an important discussion that has to run parallel to the discussion about putting more money into the system, because I'm interested not just in more, I'm interested in effective use of those dollars as well. This is the same display for math. This is now math. The earlier charts were for English language arts. And you can see, again, no clear relationship. I'm not going to be as pedantic about walking you through this graph. So you might ask the question, well, that's achievement at a point in time. And by the way, these are based on the 13-14 year when I had the last set of data that I had for the full state. So you might say, well, maybe districts that are spending more are getting better growth in achievement in learning. Maybe it's not about point in time, maybe it's about growth. So I actually did a set of graphs. We have a metric that we use in the Commonwealth for measuring year-to-year student gains. We call it a growth percentile, student growth percentile. And so what I've done is explored that question of whether or not, if we look at growth instead of achievement at a point in time, is there a relationship between spending and how much learning gain students are making from one year to the next? So this first graph is English Language Arts. SGP stands for Student Growth Percentile. And this, again, on the horizontal axis is spending. On the vertical axis is the median student growth percentile for each district. The percentiles range from 0 to 100. And you can see a pretty strong cluster, not any clear distinction. We look at growth between the 40th and 60th percentile as roughly kind of what we see statewide, right? By definition, this metric is centered around 50%. And you can see that there's a wide range of what districts spend who are getting year-to-year student growth that's roughly equivalent to the statewide average. So what do we know about the high growth districts? So this is cut at 60% percentile and above. These are districts where students, and this is ELA, are making very strong year-to-year gains compared to what we see in other districts in the state. And again, you can see there's a pretty wide range of per pupil spending that's associated with each of those. We can cut it in terms of the lowest range of percentiles below the 40th percentile. And again, there's a pretty wide range of spending. I mean, it's pretty interesting, right? I mean, we've got a couple of districts that are spending more than $25,000 per student who are getting year-to-year learning gains that trail what the rest of the districts in the state are achieving. And these are the highest spending, highest spending. And again, there's pretty wide range of year-to-year gains that they're getting for their students. This is the same display for math. So why am I showing you this? I don't want, this is not a substitute for are we spending enough? But the proposition that I'm making here is there has to be a companion question to are we spending enough, which is what do we know about what we're doing with the dollars that we have, and are we confident that we're doing the best that we can with those dollars? So part of what I'm doing in the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is building our capacity to work with school districts to better understand this variation that we're seeing. What is it that we know about districts that are getting really strong results for students? What are they spending those dollars on? What kind of expenditure patterns are they using? What kind of decisions are they making? And how does that contrast with districts where we're just not seeing very good results, either point in time or year-to-year improvement in those results? So I'm anxious that our conversation broaden beyond just are we spending enough, but also include this discussion about what do we do with the dollars that we have. Thank you.
And so now it's my pleasure to introduce our third panelist. You heard from the Commissioner what an effective academic leader she has been in the city of Chelsea, which at one time was under receivership and had a long, slow slog out of receivership. And at one point, the school system was actually given over to Boston University, and now is under the leadership of Superintendent Bourque. And she stood out in our process in the Senate on discussing charter schools and where we should be going on education. We held 3 bipartisan caucuses, all the Democratic and Republican senators together, and there was one on pro-charter, one anti-charter, and the other was a private discussion among ourselves. And Superintendent Bourque stood out, and it was one of those aha moments. And what she said was one of the major takeaways from that session, and ended up being one of the provisions in the bill that the Senate voted on this week, when she said, you know, if you're talking about charters and there's a need for more charters, the need for more charters that could also help the traditional public school districts is if there were more charters focused on at youth risk. And it was an insight that just jumped out at us, stuck with us, and the Gang of Four under the leadership of Senator Chang-Diaz said she's right, and so that provision went into the bill and is one of the highlights of that piece of legislation. With that, Superintendent Bourque.
Thank you very much. Am I on? Thank you very much. Let's try it one more time. All right, great. First of all, I want to apologize for being late. For those of you that do not know, Chelsea is right over the Mystic River to Boston. So driving out here, I got a little lost. I'm notorious of getting lost, out of a paper bag, and my GPS was very good, but I didn't believe my GPS at one point, and that was the problem. So I apologize for being tardy. From my understanding, and I don't know if you talked about the foundation budget review, but I believe I'm also going to talk about the foundation budget review. So I'm going to go maybe more global and how it affects districts. And what I am going to say certainly will not contradict the commission. I would never, ever do that.
So what's changed?
I do believe that we always have to be, as institutions, as educational entities, looking at our best practices, and we always have to be benchmarking off of those that are doing things better than us. And we're always a work in progress. We're room to grow. We're never perfect. So certainly, I am interested in the data. As a student of data, I can give the commissioner some areas where I can peel it back and say, wait a minute, we need to flesh this out a little bit more, but I won't do that today. I'll do it later to him. But certainly, what we need to be looking at is spending. And despite the fact that, putting aside that the efficiency and the efficacy of our money going to the individual student in the individual classroom in order to increase student achievement, we have to ask the question and take a step back as a state. Are we doing right by our students? Have we taken into consideration that we have not changed the formula in any significant way since 1993? We have tweaked it, I think 2007, 2010, but the tweaks have not kept up with the times, have not kept up with inflation, with the cost of healthcare, with the cost of special education. And certainly that was the charge for the Foundation Budget Review Commission. In Chelsea, we definitely, we are seeing a massive disconnect over the years, an increasing disconnect in terms of our students with special education needs. Our autism spectrum, we have, if you had asked me 20 years ago, would I as an educational leader, and by the way, I've been in Chelsea over 25 years, but I as an educational leader would have to put an autism spectrum, we call it our social communications program, into our district. I would not have believed it. 20 years ago, we put our autism students were outplaced. We've serviced them far better in district than we do out of district. A perfect example is we have now our social communications program runs pre-K to 12, and the cost of educating one student in that program, and we do a phenomenal job. We have a sensory room, OT, speech language. We have great success. But the cost is $35,000 a student for in-district. So that's not even the out-of-district piece. Certainly the Foundation Budget Review Commission, made the recommendations in terms of the out-of-district placement. I know it is on the recommendations addendum to look in the future on the in-district. Healthcare benefits, the benefits for our staff. Most certainly, you experience it. These are transcending issues, whether you're urban, suburban, or rural. This is across the state. So the question for us all, and I think that the Senate, most certainly this week, made a statement in terms of the moral imperative to put education first. As this state is the leader in the full United States for education, we have, to a certain degree, over the last 20 years, done it in name only. If we are demanding these increases in accountability, demanding that we service all the needs of our students, which is the moral right, that is the piece that we have for our students, then we also have to put the money behind it. And I agree, we have to be held accountable to make sure it's efficiently and efficacy in terms of the spending, and that we're getting the outcomes. And most certainly, that's where you have to go in as a leader, you have to go in with your staff to make sure your programs are successfully serving the student needs of the individual students. So I'm not sure if that captures what, I don't want to repeat what the senator said, and I apologize for being late, but maybe we could open it up to questions? Mm-hmm.
For those of you who have questions, could you please go to the microphone? And as your turn arrives, please introduce yourself and indicate whether you're going to be asking a question, and if so, to a specific person, and ask that person if it's to make a statement. Please preface it by saying, I'd like to make a statement, and then at the conclusion of your statement, if any of the panelists wish to offer a response, you'd be welcome to do so, okay? So we'll start with Jeff.
So it's a statement and a question. I don't know which to do first. I guess the question is, have you looked carefully at the outcomes for individual districts? Well, my name is Jeff Singleton. I used to be on the Montague Finance Committee and the Gil Montague School Committee. I wrote an article, an op-ed that was in the Greenfield Recorder last Monday on the formula. The central argument of that article is that due to historical problems with the formula, the legacy of particularly enrollment and the tendency to hold harmless districts, one of the legacies of that is you can make changes in the internal elements of the formula, but it'll produce wild and, well, I'll try to tone down the rhetoric, I'm sorry. It'll produce hugely varying outcomes that don't make any sense. And I have here, I believe this was done by the Superintendent's Association, a sort of a one-year simulation of what the outcomes would be for particular districts. Mm-hmm. It has Boston getting nothing out of this. It has Somerville getting 0 out of this. It has Amherst nothing, Mohawk nothing. It has some districts, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I'm seeing Brookline getting a 50% increase in their Chapter 70. Northampton has a 4% increase. Gil Montague has an 8% increase. Greenfield does pretty well. They have about close to a 15% increase. This is all over the place. And I guess the comments I would make, number one, there's achievement gaps in Boston as well, and they're not getting anything. How does that work? But the other issue I have here is I think historically, one of the problems with the formula, and I think one of the reasons the legislature is hesitant to deal with it, is there always seem to be these huge winners and losers. So you do a tweak in the formula, or a large, this is definitely a big one, I get it. And I think it's very well justified in terms of the internal logic of the formula. But in the end, it produces these huge winners and losers, and everybody's still unsatisfied with it. So I guess my question is, don't we have to look at outcomes for individual districts before we start pouring state money into this?
So I would love to take a look at that because to refresh my memory. And is that something that MASS put out on the low-income economically disadvantaged, the recent issue, or is that the simulation from last spring?
This is a simulation of what the recommendations of the Foundation Budget Review Commission would do. It assumes FY14. I'm not sure why it was done with FY14 as well, but it's probably because that's an actual, so you don't have to. You don't have to.
Reports, yeah.
Yeah, it makes sort of some sense to do a past one just to give a general sense of the variations. Mm-hmm. I don't know. This was sent to me by someone in Northampton, and I was told it was done by the superintendents.
So just to jump in, I strongly suspect that simulation was based on the healthcare and special ed recommendations of the commission, but not the low income, probably also including the English language learner, but not the low income, because the reports stopped short of putting a specific dollar amount on the low income. We gave a range for percentage weighting. This is getting into the weeds for low income students, but stopped short of sort of fully costing it out. So my guess is, and I mean, as a senator representing Boston, I can tell you for sure that we do have substantial achievement gaps that we struggle with in Boston, and that the low income recommendations of the commission are the one thing that would really be a game changer for Boston. So just based on that, I suspect that's the one piece that might be missing from that simulation. But your larger point of the way that sort of historical hold harmless provisions have accumulated over time, over budget years, to cause some end dollar amounts district by district that look wacky on the page is true. And that's a political reality, and I'll be blunt about it. I mean, I think that as we, as a commission, have sought feedback, there was no district that we heard say, "Yep, I'll take a reduction," because my enrollment's going down year over year, and that is, in addition to figuring out the right technical solution, the second job that we as legislators have to struggle with is how do you make this politically workable in the real lives of people who are going to have to make this work at the municipal and district level.
I think just one kind of addition to this. So this is challenging for us as a state. As a state, our K-12 public school enrollment is roughly steady. It's declining a little bit, but not a lot. But what's happening differs substantially from one district to another. So we have parts of the state, and some of you are experiencing this, that are experiencing declining enrollment. We have districts that are experiencing growing enrollment. And so the challenge is, how do you take that into account in terms of school funding?
I think the other thing, too, is I would recommend, if you want to give me an email, I can give you some other simulations that MASS has done subsequently from the spring. So it may be a timing piece as well.
Tim Walter, pre-K is the most cost-effective spending. So what's being done about pre-K in Massachusetts, and is there a movement towards universal pre-K?
Yes. Yes. I got a bill for that. I mean that in all earnestness. I do have a bill for that. There's actually a few different versions of legislation still within the Education Committee that we're working on, putting out a composite version of to get at the goal of universal access to high-quality early education. It also is, something that I think there's a pathway to through the Foundation Budget Review Commission. There's not, in the findings of the commission, we said specifically that that high-quality early education is a lever that the legislature really needs to take a hard look at and figure out, how do we make that part of our core, what we now call K through 12 education system, and extend that pipeline backwards, in recognition of if we really want to get to success in the 21st century, that is probably the most proven tool that we have for closing the achievement gap and getting to success. And what we found, one of the things we did within the commission, and it was hotly debated, and I look at Mary and I look at the commissioner because they were both part of the commission, was there was a hot debate about how much should we as a state prescribe what districts should spend the money on, right? That we're going to recommend some substantial increases here. There's questions about, where do you get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of how districts are spending their money? How prescriptive are we going to be? And what we found when we looked at sort of national best practices and best practices in districts across the state is that there's not a one-size-fits-all prescription. And so we were hesitant to say in a formulaic way, here's how you need to spend this money exactly. As much as I am a true believer in pre-K. But that there's a sort of a smallish menu of options that really, where most of the best practices cluster around. Universal high-quality early education is one, extended learning time is another, wraparound services and social and emotional supports is another. And we said in the report that we want to make that low-income increment that we're attaching to students in the formula large enough that districts, particularly those districts with high concentrations of poverty, can undertake more than one of those strategies concurrently, because that's what we really found, again, when looking at best practices, is that you can't just do one and expect that to solve the problem. So we said to districts, we're not going to say you have to spend it on exactly this, but we're going to give you this chunk of money that we expect to be enough to do a couple of these at least at the same time, and we urge you to look at this menu of options and target the money in that way.
I think I just want to, also mention, pre-K is probably one of the best researched in terms of, getting student outcomes. Right now, Chelsea we're diving in deeply to the social emotional issues and how do we build those resilient learners over time. And we're doing a lot of research with the trauma-sensitive classroom, and we're reading How Children Succeed by Paul Tough. And so, one of the chapters goes into the fact that the pre-K student, and the research has shown that the pre-K student, by the time they get to third grade, academically, it's not quite clear if they have an academic heads up. But what they do have is, over time, Pre-K students have more self-regulation, they have stronger perseverance, more determination, there's lower dropout rate, higher graduation rate, and college entrance and college completion with students who have a pre-K experience. So I go back to the fact that if we as a state are morally putting out there that education of the next generation is our #1 top priority, then this definitely has to be a part of that comprehensive plan to have our schools service the needs of all our students.
I just want to note
Go ahead.
that I think probably this room is made up of 50% women at least, and I see one woman in line for a question. So I just want to encourage you not to keep your questions to yourself. If you have a good question, probably other people have it too.
There are now
Okay, good. Two and going.
Yes. Okay.
My name is Jim Draw. I'm a selectman in Cummington. I want to applaud the commissioner for looking at the effectiveness of spending rather than the total spend. But I wonder if you normalized your data for salaries across the state, that might change the picture that you're seeing for normalizing salaries and normalizing for cost of living in those districts. The other thing I wonder is that I have a provisional question. In the town of Cummington, there are 465 households. And according to my postmaster, 18% of the addresses in Cummington are not in Cummington. So when the data from DOR is used to say how rich or poor the town of Cummington is, we have several high-value people who live on the borders of Cummington are not in Cummington. And that skews our numbers. And to me, the simple solution is for DOR to put a little box on the tax returns that says town of residency. Then you can get accurate numbers. It doesn't make much difference to large cities. It all averages out. But when you've got 450 households and 18% of them are not in the town, that has a huge difference on the amount of money that we get. There are 6 towns in western Massachusetts where the post office serves all of the surrounding towns, and those numbers are skewed, and it really impacts us significantly. Thank you. Thank you.
So given the number of people in line, and the amount of time left, what I'm going to suggest is we're going to go another 7 minutes or so as is, and then we're going to the lightning round. And everyone will be expected to either speak here very briefly, and then if someone's going to speak here, extremely briefly as well. And if you can, if one of you can respond, if there are questions, that would be good just to keep it moving, okay? And you're on.
Thank you. Lark Twing, Chair, Mohawk Trail Regional School District. We're the largest geographic district, and we have 6 buildings that serve the 8 towns in 2 different districts. We have the Mohawk Trail and we have Hollamont. And we have about 1,100 students total among those 6 buildings. We are looking, first of all, we went the route that Chelsea did. Pre-K is now part of our curriculum. We provide pre-K. We realize that it's a way to bring kids in, keep kids in the district, and have them more prepared and reduce special ed costs as we go out in the future. Second thing is, in our communities, it is more than just a school issue. It is a community issue because these buildings in communities serve more than just as a school. And as we try and figure out how to reduce our costs, because populating staff in all these buildings is very expensive, we're trying to figure out how to repurpose the buildings without being hammered by MSBA in the process. So anything that can be done to help the rural communities would be very much appreciated. And by the way, thank you greatly for the charter bill. It is what all of us out here have been saying. You know, there's a need for charter schools, but we have great education. We don't need them, and we don't want them to affect us. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
I'm Michael DeChiara. I'm on the Select Board of Shutesbury, and I was 9 years on the Shutesbury School Committee and 2 on the Amherst Regional. So I just want to frame this in terms of how districts are configured. I'm not labeling that, just the configuration. And I guess one thing I would just sort of maybe compliment the Commissioner on, about 10 years ago, I was in Boston, and there was one slide dedicated to Union 28, because it was high cost and weirdly configured, and it was targeted as the problem. So the evolution of thinking about that, I compliment you on. So what I would say for Ed Reform 3.0, now that you've achieved 2.0?
Well, it's not done yet.
not done
You got to get it through the House.
Anyway, but moving along in terms of the deep thinking, and I've talked to Stan and also Rep. Kulik about this, the challenge is delinking governance from operations because, as the commissioner sort of alluded to, if you have communities that are having declining enrollment, the first place, especially when people Boston go, is bring them all together. And the problem is that the governance and the operations are the barrier. So if you can de-link governance, I think you would have more willing partnerships. But as long as governance goes along with operations, there's going to be resistance. And I'd love to chat with you. I don't necessarily need a response, but.
Yeah, point very well taken and well articulated. Anytime, I was wondering if we'd get through an hour without talking about regional solutions here. So, anytime you talk about regional solutions that imply a loss of local governance control, it's a tough sell. So I have been where I think you're articulating more and more on sort of operations. Do we need to replicate the backroom functions or some of the programmatic functions district by district? Some of you are aware that the state just took receivership of Southbury School District, a school district twice the enrollment of Mohawk, 2,200 students, but a small school district. And part of what I'm looking at is, do we really need to create the backroom functions, the payroll, the HR, maybe even the special ed administration for this one district, or can we pool that with neighboring districts? So I appreciate your comment.
Right. The one asterisk, and that'll stop, Stan, is I think we've got the beginnings of a format in terms of collaboratives, and if we look to New York State with the BOCES model, there's a lot of, whether it's professional development, et cetera, where, one entity can serve multiple. And I'll hand it on to
Point well taken, yeah.
Hi, dovetailing off of a few, I'm Aaron Osborne, Union 28 Schools. I was hopeful that maybe each of you could briefly comment on the use of per student spending as a valid metric to compare school districts.
Well, I think probably there's no one metric, right, in any of this that we do that is valid in a vacuum.
Is that the best, though?
Well, it's not. I mean, you have to take a composite. Mm-hmm. Again, and this is my opinion.
Do you have a suggestion?
Percent over net school spending.
Okay.
Maybe something that factors for wage differences, all of the factors that go into foundation budget, special education costs, ELL requirements, things like that. As I look at that graph, I can tell you probably who those $30,000 schools are. Mm-hmm. Those are easy to find out. I can probably figure out who those $10,000 schools are, and I can explain the geographic, the socioeconomic differences that go on in those districts.
Is what you're talking about as a metric to measure sort of effort put into educating students?
Yes, we're trying to talk apples to apples. Yeah. So you have lovely graphs up there that compare what's perceived as apples to apples. But when I look at pay scales on Martha's Vineyard versus pay scales in Wendell, New Salem, which is one of my districts, there's a big difference. Yeah. Transportation in Provincetown, I know that's an enormous issue. Yeah. Things like that. So those are huge factors in those per student costs. I believe that net school spending and the foundation budget at least makes an effort to take those things into account.
Yeah,
right.
That's point well taken.
Point well taken. Again, my point with these graphs was to say we need to dig into this more. Right. We need to understand what people do with their money, and is there variation that points us towards something we should all be thinking about or all be moving away from.
Right.
I would agree. I would also say that there does have to be a nexus with the socioeconomic status of districts in general, as well as demography. So the student demography is critical. Certainly Chelsea's immigrant population. Absolutely we need more money because we have students that are coming to us at age 15 and they haven't been to school since second grade. And so the gaps we have to close are significant, and that takes more money.
So your per student cost is significantly higher as a result.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy. going to be heard. I'm Kathy Reinig, the Town of Orange, a selectman, and my first quick question is how we can get access to the report as well as the legislation on the path forward, because I've not seen either. The longer question, I'm going to pass over the special ed needs, which is really serious in our district, and look more at how regionalizations and distances in travel. Has any research been done on how long a child has to travel to get to school on the bus or whatever, and how this affects their achievement rate? Because at the moment, the overhead for our schools stays the same despite the fact that the population in the schools decreases. Mm-hmm. The answer everyone says is regionalization, but if that means the kids staying on the bus for over an hour every day to go to school and another hour to come home, how does that affect their overall life and their overall learning? Where is the point at which we need to put more money into the overhead, even though it's, money into overhead, so that we can keep our kids from traveling long distances?
I'll try and do lightning round. So in terms of finding the bill and the report, I think if the report is posted on DESE's website. If you just Google a Foundation Budget Review Commission, Massachusetts, it'll pop up. And then kudos to the Senate President here. I mean, we have just taken leaps and bounds in transparency and public access online to good stuff that the legislature is doing. So if you go to the legislature's website, and right there on the front page you can put in a bill number, and it's Senate 2203, I believe, and it'll pull up the bill text, the amendments that were debated on Thursday, the whole 9 yards. In terms of the transportation question, I am not aware, maybe the commissioner is, of a body of research out there about it, but what I can tell you, on a more anecdotal level, although it's many years of anecdotal, that the METCO program, which serves Boston and Springfield, is sort of a touchstone that I think of about transportation. Long hours and distances of transportation, where students are going from Boston to suburban communities in the suburban ring around Boston, and racking up incredible achievements. I mean, consistently year over year, these are some of the most challenged student populations, consistently outperforming not just Boston averages but statewide averages for graduation rates, college attendance. So that's a bright spot in my mind of that transportation hours is not a determinative factor. But again, I'm not, that's one sort of lane of data, and I don't know about a larger body.
Just a quick footnote here. In the Senate bill that we voted on this week, we put a version of Superintendent Bonaconti's suggestion based on, I think it was Wisconsin. He called it scarcity aid. I don't know what we called it, but we put a version of that in the package, which is not to discourage regionalization, but to recognize the issue of scale, even as we try to be more efficient and regionalize some parts of it, even if not whole school districts. With that, we'll go on.
The Senate President is being very humble. He pushed really hard for that for you guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Kathy. Yes, sir.
My name is Kalian Uprichard. I'm new to the Covington Board of Health. Our select board's member stood up before. I wanted to just speak to the fact that rural communities in West Mass in particular have been losing their elementary schools. And this means, little kids have to either be commuted by their parents or ride on the bus for an hour plus. And yes, I'm aware of the town of Covington has a population of all of 876 people. It's tiny when you're looking at the whole state. But these are very cohesive communities that want to keep their kids closer and don't want to leave them on the bus for so long. And we just don't want to fall through the loopholes. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take that as a statement. Next.
Hi, Ruth Kennedy from the Gateway Regional School District. It's kind of a little bit off topic, but I'm concerned about all the mandates that come down to the school. Our employees spend an awful lot of time out of a day working on filling out the mandate programs and getting them ready to be signed and sent to different offices and here and there and everywhere. And there's a lot of them. I'm wondering if there's a mechanism in place, either in the House, the Senate, or with DESE, that can kind of slow these down and take a look at what we already have and maybe get rid of some of the old ones, because we've still got the old ones in there. They've never been taken out, and maybe take those out, then start with new ones. Because they are very expensive. It would cut our costs down. We'd have more money to spend on our kids.
Appreciate the comment, and we are looking at mandates, and particularly, trying to distinguish between mandates that are requirements, either in federal or state statute, versus those that have been created administratively. Do you have an example of a mandate that you think, if your district didn't have to do it, it would save money or time?
Not off the top of my head. I've been speaking with a lot of the teachers and administrators and the superintendent and everything, and this is one of their biggest problems, is all the paperwork they have to fill out. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, but I haven't gotten an exact list of what at home I do, but I don't here. Because I wasn't expecting to ask it, but I can provide it to you if you would like me to send it
That would be
to
great.
everybody.
Love to see that, yep.
Okay, thank you very much.
If you get it to me, I'll get it to the three panelists.
Perfect.
I bet you Mary's saying, I don't need that. I know about this man.
Okay. Okay, so now we're literally in the lightning round, okay? So I'm going to ask you to be extremely brief and extremely brief answers if there's an answer.
Yeah, Hussein Hamdan, Hollamont Regional School Committee, and I'm also on the Budget Subcommittee, so I get to deal with that headache. Look, we had a 1.5% budget increase, but when I go to my town with the assessments at town meeting this year, I have to tell them that's a 14.5% assessment increase, because for some reason the state thinks that we're a wealthy town and with minimum contribution and all. So I am very much in favor of what Superintendent Bonaconti has proposed, sparsity aid for rural school districts. It works completely different out here. It's just ridiculous the way we have to spend money to achieve the same results because of the distances and all that. And the second thing is, I don't think you need much research to prove that if a student has to sit on a bus for 30 minutes longer, that's 30 minutes out of their day that they could have been using on homework, on physical activity. It's killing time, and it's killing time in a bad way. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Vera Dwangmani Cage, and I am on the Amherst School Committee. And I came here in 1980 when I was 6 years old, and we didn't have MCAS then. And I appreciate that we're using evaluation methods, MCAS measurements that are not in step with the demographics of our time. And can the superintendent speak to the amount of resources? Is it more expensive because we're trying to teach these tests to the students, and then what happens to those students when they're needing to repeat grades and their social and emotional? Thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly, in terms of the MCAS or PARC, we have been, if you think of the fact that we start from our standards and we start from the mass frameworks, and then we do our instruction, we do have to have some mechanism in place, and I believe deeply in some mechanism that measures our achievement and how well are we doing, so we can be self-reflective. How well are we doing with our students? Simultaneously, I am a proponent of expanding what we're doing to more internal assessments as well. In Chelsea, we have performance assessments. We have capstone project, capstone defense twice a year for our high school, for example. One of the things I do think we have to look at is how many assessments are we giving, and can we streamline? I question, and I know it's long. I question, the MCAS or the PARC levels and the access levels, and why do immigrant students have to take both tests? And couldn't we use the access until students become proficient as the substitute for MCAS or PARC? So those are the things that, and I know that those are the things also that the commissioner's staff is questioning, and we're wrestling with.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Naughton on the Montague Finance Committee, and I was actually around when our local Gil-Montague School District had to be taken over fiscally by the state because of failed budgets, and I was part of an effort to end that situation, and I hope we don't have to go through it again. We are facing challenges, though. because we are a district whose enrollment has been going down, maybe because population is going down out here in Western Massachusetts. And I don't mean to pick on the senator, but you opened the door when you mentioned a school. Nobody wants to raise their hand and say, I'll take less because my enrollment's going down. Well, if you're an 1,100 student district in 2 or more towns, your enrollment going down does not mean that your costs go down. We have consolidated maybe to as much as we possibly can. We keep looking for opportunities, and again, not to pick on the commissioner, but you know, if you can show us that consolidating things like back offices can actually save something significant, we'd be very interested. But the back office is not a big part of our total budget. Teachers and programs and materials are the biggest parts of our budget, and teachers want to get raises, and we have to pay for buildings, and those costs don't go away if if our enrollment goes down. So I'd like to underline what's been said about looking at sparsity aid, but just understanding that costs to a district are not a simple linear function of enrollment. That's the assumption of the foundation formula. It's been wrong from the beginning. It's still wrong, and I encourage you to think about it. I appreciate the commissioner's efforts to try to think outside the box and see how can we spend more effectively. Let's do more than think. Let's come up with solutions. Quite frankly, when DESE was in charge of our district, we didn't see much. Let's hope we can change that.
Okay, so I see that the line grew since I said we were in the lightning round. So here I am literally going to watch that clock. And at 45 seconds, I'm going to say thank you.
Rick Martin, the Superintendent of Franklin County Regional School District. We have about 550 square miles of transportation for our students, and the Mohawks School District has over 350. So we are faced with very much increasing regional transportation cost, and we're not getting reimbursed as what was originally promised at 100% for regional schools. And we're looking at a way to try to offset that, and we are consistently pulling money out of our operating budget to cover those costs. And with the hold harmless formula potentially changing, that could be a potential hit for those school districts like us that are declining in enrollment. So is there any
thank you.
type of plans to address that?
Okay, Gloria, 45 seconds.
Oh, I can do it in faster than that. I'm Gloria Fisher. I'm on the Heath Finance Committee on the Heath School Task Force trying to help find solutions for our schools. And I have one question, and it's a yes or no answer. And it's, these are the hill towns, very small populations, off Route 2, and our students are handicapped because they can't do their homework for lack of broadband. Teachers can't use it to teach, and students line up at night in cars in the cold in front of the library so they can use the wireless. And I want to know if DESE is encouraging the state to find a broadband solution for our towns.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And final comment or question?
I'm Noreen Seriner, a former member of the school committee at Gateway Regional, and one of the questions that we have not talked about today is expanding vocational education in our more rural communities, because that really is the greater need. And apparently there's some laws that our superintendent says that we can't do. Can there be some changes so that we can have and expand vocational ed? That's my comment.
Yeah, just very quickly, I'm not sure what the laws are that are preventing that, but certainly the Baker administration, our current governor, is very interested in expanding access to vocational technical experiences, and not necessarily the regional model that we have being the only way. Right now, you're either 4 years full-time in a vocational technical high school or not. And so we're also thinking about, are there mix and match solutions where you remain in your residential high school but can experience vocational technical as well?
Very good. Well, let us give a wild round of applause and thanks. All three of these panelists had to leave the Boston area at the crack of dawn to be with us this morning. Thank you. Wonderful job.
Thank you.
All of our productions at GCTV are brought to you in part by The Arbors at Greenfield, assisted living community providing a unique balance of independence and personal care that offers residents and families the most precious gift of all, peace of mind. Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it, close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com, call them at 773-0838, and check them out on Facebook. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all the productions at Greenfield Community Television.